Welcome to the 2024 Concessioner Orientation video. You should have just watched On the Water, Glacier Bay's general boater orientation video. This segment will provide a review of highlights of requirements under your concessions contract with us. Your commercial services team here at Glacier Bay is a team of 5 people currently. Melanie Berg is our Chief of Commercial Services. Elizabeth Gercio, Rebecca Mitria, Whitney Rapp, and Zachary Benedict are your concessions management specialists.
While at the public use dock of Bartlett Cove, please be aware of the rules while boating around. As a reminder, you do not need to use one of your entry permits if you are only motoring east of the fuel pier. You may also launch a skiff off of your main vessel without an additional permit, only if you are east of the fuel pier. For 2024, the Glacier Bay Lodge will operate from Memorial Day through Labor Day. For exact dates, please reference the Lodge website and the Concessioner Resources webpage. The Visitor Information Station is open 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock p.m. in May, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in June, July, and August, and 8 o'clock to 5 p.m. in September. You can contact the Visitor Information Station by hailing them on the radio at KWM20 Bartlett Cove or by phone at 907-697-2627. Glacier Bay is ever-changing as landslides and glacial rebound make their mark on the landscape. Please be aware of currents, tides, and weather while in the park, including the above information. Feeding and hunting wildlife is prohibited in the park. Launching and using drones, discharging firearms, and explosives are prohibited. Your AIS must be broadcasting at all times while you're operating in the park. While in the bay, your vessel is under a limited entry permit. A skiff launch from the anchored vessel continues to carry that permit. There must be only one vessel operating under that entry permit, whether it be the skiff or the main vessel. Tenders, skiffs, and dibs must have their own entry permit if they want to operate at the same time as the larger vessel in the bay. If you are outside of the bay, the limited entry permit does not apply, and you may have multiple skiffs in the water launched from the main vessel. If you are on the land, whether inside or outside of the bay, it is more than likely that you are in designated wilderness. The wilderness boundary is mean high tide. The group size limit is 12, and that includes guides, and you must be out of sight and sound of each other. If you are not in wilderness, which is most of the park's marine waters, the group size is 12, and groups must disperse, preferably outside of sight and sound of other groups.
Here are some charter vessel specific regulations. The use of Dundas Bay is limited to those charter vessel contract holders who have an allocation for the bay. During the June through August permit season, charter vessels are restricted from utilizing a private boating permit and from using a commercial charter entry for a private trip without prior written approval from the superintendent. Those approvals will be made by a case-by-case basis. Franchise fees are for any location within the park boundary, including the portion of Excursion Inlet, Outer Waters, Glacier Bay, and other bays within the park boundary. When paying fees, be sure to use Glacier Bay National Parks form and not Glacier National Park. Scheduling. Scheduling applies to Glacier Bay itself from June 1 to September 30th. Our GIS department has created a suite of guides, maps, and charts to help you navigate the park's complex regulations and your contract requirements. These maps are available on the Concessioner Resources webpage, and many are also available on the Avenza app. You can find the chart showing select Glacier Bay regulations throughout the year, the South Marble Island map showing appropriate approach distances, the Johns Hopkins Inlet map indicating approach guidelines for glacial areas, and the Tour Vessel Quick Guide to Areas with Restrictions and Closures, which is a quick guide to draw your attention to restrictions and closures, but is not intended to give you the detailed information. So please use those more detailed area charts as you navigate near these areas.
And now for a little more on tour vessel off-vessel activities. Please be aware of new terminology in new contracts, glacier access zones, and focus use areas. Our park planning and backcountry teams are currently developing maps to define those parameters. When our office receives the maps, they'll be posted on the Concessioner Resources webpage and disseminated via email.
Reporting. You must provide the superintendent immediate written notice of any discharge, release, or threatened release within or at the vicinity of the park. This includes solids, semi-solids, liquids or gases, any hazardous or toxic substance, any contaminant, pollutant, petroleum product, or byproduct. You must provide us notice of any threatened or actual notice of violation from all other regulatory agencies, and you must immediately report any violations of National Park Service regulations to the Commercial Services Office. These include any personal injury to clients or crew that require more than first aid, wildlife incidents, property damage over $500, any whale strikes or possible whale strikes.
In case of an emergency, you can reach the NPS Alaska Regional Communication Center, or ARCC. They operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and can be reached by phone at 907-697-2651 or by hailing National Park Service Emergency Dispatch via Marine VHF Channel 16, or, of course, by calling Mayday, Mayday, Mayday on Marine VHF 16. Be sure to contact the Commercial Services Office at 907-697-2567 or GLBA_concessions at nps.gov to give notice of any incident. Specific medevac procedures. Have the captain call ARCC. Please include the following information: the nature of the situation, the location, the level of care that is currently being provided, and contact information. Depending upon the medical situation, the level of medical training of those on board, the supplies available, and the environmental situation, ARCC can notify the park rangers. These conditions will determine the park's response.
Periodic evaluations are an important component of your contract and weigh into your annual overall rating. The components of the periodic operational evaluation and annual overall rating can be found in the evaluation portion of your contract's operating plan. Remember, your contract requires you to provide full access to management, property, documentation, and other resources necessary for the service to conduct these evaluations. Plus, having a completed periodic evaluation assists you on your annual overall rating.
If you find your operation in need of educational materials, we have park maps and fair weather newspapers available at the Visitor Information Station. Don't forget the NPS app. We're always adding more material to the app so you can download it for offline use. If you're interested in experiencing the Huna Tribal House or the Visitor Center located in the lodge, the hours of operation and seasonal programs will be available on the park website, as well as posted in the Visitor Center and at the lodge. The cultural resources in Glacier Bay are protected by multiple laws and regulations. The forefront of these are the National Historic Protection Act and the Archaeological Resource Protection Act. The National Historic Protection Act mandates federal agencies to identify cultural resources within federal lands. The Archaeological Resource Protection Act, or ARPA, recognizes that the archaeological resources are an irreplaceable part of America's heritage and that they were increasingly in danger. Violating ARPA carries stiff penalties and jail time. When you're adventuring in the park or preserve, it is important to pay attention to your surroundings and avoid impacting any historic structures or cultural resources. As a reminder, please do not disturb or remove objects from these places, buildings, or sites. Enjoyment of the national parks is a fundamental part of the visitor experience. That experience is heightened when a connection is made by linking the park's resources to values, meanings, and environments. So please enjoy the rare occurrence of stumbling onto a cultural resource and allow them the protections they need and deserve. We're excited for you to visit the historic Glacier Bay Lodge and the Tribal House this summer.
For more resources such as up-to-date schedules, activity report forms, maps, and more, check out the Concessioner Resources webpage. After you've watched On the Water and this 2024 Concessionaire orientation video, please fill out and send us your verification form. You can send it in by email or mail. Do not drop them off at the visitor information station. If you have any questions, please contact us at glba_concessions@mps.gov. We look forward to seeing you soon and have a great 2024 season.
We are all so lucky to work in one of the most beautiful places on Earth and to spend time around some of the coolest wildlife in the world, marine mammals. I'm excited to share this presentation with you today. My main goals are to provide you with current information to share with your passengers, to provide tips on how to abide by park regulations to keep people and marine mammals safe, and to invite and encourage you to report your sightings and information to the park. Here's a visual on the most commonly sighted marine mammals in Glacier Bay. This is not all of them, but these are the most commonly sighted species. So now I'm going to jump into the regulations and viewing guidelines that the park has to protect marine mammals from disturbance. I'm going to start with humpback whales. As many of you know, we have regulations in place in Glacier Bay National Park waters to protect humpback whales from collisions and disturbance. One of the main rules that we have is a regulation that prohibits any vessel, including kayaks, from approaching a humpback whale within 1/4 mile. Now, it's important to note that this regulation applies in all park waters, not just Glacier Bay proper, but also park waters out in Icy Strait and Cross Sound. We also have whale waters. These are areas of vessel course and speed restrictions that are designated by the superintendent based on the presence of whales, and they usually involve a speed limit and sometimes a course restriction. Many of you would be familiar with the Lower Bay whale waters that are seasonally in place every year. They're marked on the map shown on the right in blue in the Lower Bay. And in Lower Bay whale waters from May 15th to September 30th, there is a 20-knot vessel speed restriction and a requirement for vessels over 18 feet to travel 1 mile offshore or further, and mid-channel if 1 mile is impossible. That speed limit in the Lower Bay gets lowered to 13 knots when whale numbers increase in the Lower Bay, which happens most summers. And like I said, there's a mid-channel course restriction or 1 mile offshore requirement for vessels over 18 feet in whale waters. There can also be whale waters in designated in any part of Glacier Bay. Last summer in 2022, we had whale waters commonly in place up in the West Arm and entrance to the East Arm in the Mid Bay. Those are temporary whale waters that we designate based on our monitoring and recommendations to the superintendent on where vessel speed limits and sometimes course restrictions can help to protect whales that are congregating in other areas outside the Lower Bay. There are no speed limits outside of whale waters areas, but whales can be present anywhere, can show up unexpectedly, pop up anywhere. So it's always best to use your best judgment. If you see a lot of birds feeding in an area, that's usually a good sign that there may be a whale nearby. The congregations of seabirds feeding and whales feeding often overlap. So always be prepared for a whale to show up where you least expect it and adjust your speed as needed and course. When whales are mid-channel, it's important to remember that you may alter course as necessary to avoid them. The intent of keeping whales and vessels separate in whale waters is to avoid collisions and disturbance, but sometimes the whales feed mid-channel. So it's never a good idea to be exactly where a whale is, and especially in its path. So as needed, there are exceptions. If a whale is right mid-channel and you're mid-channel, it's okay to deviate around that whale. The intent of the rule is to keep whales and vessels separate, like a traffic separation scheme. When you're out kayaking doing off-vessel activities, it's important to realize that the 1/4 mile approach regulation also applies to kayaks, and that when you're in a kayak, you are quiet, and that's a great way to experience the bay. But whales are very focused on feeding and socializing, and when quiet vessels are nearby, they are very likely to not realize that you're there. So humpback whales do not have echolocation. A lot of folks don't realize this. Humpback whales have no sonar abilities. They do not know that a vessel is there unless the vessel is making noise. So if you're drifting silently or paddling quietly, do not ever assume that the whale knows where you are. It's important to make noise to let the whales know that you're nearby and to give the whales plenty of space. Whales are really busy when they're feeding here in the summer. They're focused on feeding, they're focused on socializing, and they're not necessarily paying attention to their surroundings. There may also be underwater noise from motorized vessels nearby that prevents the whale from hearing you quietly paddling nearby in a kayak. So the quarter-mile approach regulation can really help to keep you and your guests safe. But if a whale does happen to pop up closer, you can make noise to help the whale know that you're there. Knocking on your hull with your paddle is never a bad idea. In small boats, you can that are drifting or anchored, you can stomp on the hull or bang something on the hull to make noise. Every once in a while, just to remind the whale, "Hey, I'm over here. I'm here," and we can all try to keep whales and vessels safe. So when in doubt, make some noise. Outside of park waters, there is a 100-yard approach regulation in all Alaska waters outside the park for humpback whales. So never place your vessel in the path of an oncoming humpback whale. This is sometimes known as T-boning a whale. It's also against the law in Alaska. And the regulations also state that you must operate your vessel at a slow, safe speed when near a humpback whale. So when you're in an area where you're seeing blows, adjust your speed accordingly. And again, always anticipate that there could be a whale popping up where you least expect it. NOAA manages and puts out lots of different great outreach materials on their website to guide boaters outside of park waters. This is one of the informational materials they have currently available, an outreach material they have on their website. The NOAA Alaska region has this Give Whales Bubble Room handout. They also have a whale sense program that guides operators with best management practices on how to protect whales. The main take-home messages are to maintain that 100-yard distance or more from a humpback whale. If you change a whale's behavior, even if you're further than 100 yards away, you need to give that whale more space. It's never a good idea to change an animal's behavior, and to limit viewing time to 30 minutes or less, and to give mothers and calves especially a lot of space, and not to be spending too much time with them. So how can you help? Well, we're really interested in mother-calf pairs because reproductive rates are one of the main metrics that we use to gauge the health of the population. And any unusual sightings are also always welcome. So large groups of whales in areas that you wouldn't usually expect to see them. We love hearing about those kinds of sightings. Please report them to the Viz, or you can call us directly on the Sandlance. We do monitor channels 12 and 16. Another way you can help is to encourage your passengers and any of your crew to submit photos of humpback whale tails that they get anywhere in Southeast Alaska or anywhere in their travels, including Glacier Bay, to happywhale.com. We've been partnering with happywhale.com, which is an online platform new in the last couple of years that has this really cool ability to automatically match humpback whale tails to a large catalog of whales in the North Pacific. It's using facial recognition algorithms to recognize the tail patterns on humpback whales and provide almost immediate feedback. Within a few days of submitting a photo, you get an email notification telling you who the whale was that you saw, whether it's new to science, and if not, where it's been seen in the past. It's a great platform that's really easy to use, and we submit all of our photos to that as part of a research collaboration, and it's really increased our understanding of humpback whales throughout the North Pacific. You can also help by reporting any animals that you see in distress. And this is not just for humpback whales, but any marine mammals in the park. So if you see sea lions at South Marble Island hauled out with entanglements, like shown here in the top left photo and the top middle photo, those animals, please report those as soon as possible to the Viz. Dead sea otters found on your off-vessel activities, any dead marine mammal. Harbor porpoise are especially of interest because, as I said before, their population structure is poorly understood, and samples from harbor porpoises are highly valued for looking at genetics and other things having to do with the health of that population. So please report any strandings to the park as soon as possible, any animal in distress, and photographs are very helpful while still maintaining the recommended distances for viewing. And if you find a dead animal, for your safety, do not touch the animal or have any of your visitors touch the animal. A lot of these animals are carrying diseases that can be transferred to humans. Another way that you can help is to download and use the Whale Alert app on your mobile device. Whale Alert is a mobile app that was developed a few years ago. It's been used since 2016 in collaboration between the Park Service, NOAA, and the cruise ship companies in Southeast Alaska. And this app, anyone can download the app for free, log their humpback whale or other whale sightings in the app in real time, even if you're offline with no service. These sightings will get uploaded to a web map as soon as you're back on Wi-Fi or within service. And these maps are created for the cruise ship bridge crews to increase their situational awareness on where whales are congregating in Southeast Alaska to help them avoid collisions. They can use that information to post an extra lookout or to choose preemptively to reduce the ship's speed. The maps are intended for cruise ship use only, so they are not publicly available. But it's really great to have sightings coming in to help populate those maps to give cruise ships the best possible chance of understanding where whales are congregating so that they can avoid those areas and help those large vessels avoid collisions. Now onto harbor seals. As I said, I would mention harbor seals. Well, Glacier Bay has some protections and regulations in place to keep harbor seals from being disturbed, especially during molting and pupping season. In Johns Hopkins Inlet, this inlet is closed to all vessels and kayaks from May 1st to June 30th. Beginning July 1st, it's open to all vessels except for cruise ships. Cruise ships are allowed starting September 1st. Johns Hopkins Inlet is a very important area for pupping, and from July 1st to August 31st, while vessels besides cruise ships are allowed in Johns Hopkins Inlet, there is a regulation to stay 1/4 mile away from any seal hauled out on ice, except for safe navigation purposes. There's also a 10-knot speed limit in Johns Hopkins Inlet from July 1st to August 31st. It's important to remember that icebergs and seals may be present outside the seasonal closure area in Johns Hopkins Inlet and near other glacier faces as well. So it's always a good idea to approach and depart fjords anywhere in Southeast Alaska with a plan to avoid surprising seals. Try to avoid traveling through thick ice where seals are more likely to be hauled out. Stay 1/4 mile from seals hauled out on ice is always a good goal to have. And in some cases it is regulated, as in Johns Hopkins Inlet in some parts of the summer. Vessels can help by minimizing their wake and avoiding loud noises and using the PA system during times when seals are nearby on icebergs. Again, if you're too close, you may observe a change in the animal's behavior, and any change in the animal's behavior, whether it's a seal or a whale or any of the terrestrial wildlife or a bird, if you're changing an animal's behavior, you are too close. Glacier Bay also has several regulations to help protect stellar sea lions from disturbance. So there is a regulation in Glacier Bay National Park to stay at least 100 yards from all hauled out stellar sea lions anywhere in the park. And again, you're too close if you observe a change in an animal's behavior. Want to make sure folks understand that we have two different stocks of stellar sea lions in Alaska. There's an eastern stock and a western stock. The eastern stock is no longer listed under the Endangered Species Act. The western stock is listed as endangered, and even though the stocks are designated on this map as clearly showing that we should, in Glacier Bay, be only seeing eastern non-endangered stellar sea lions, there's actually quite a bit of overlap in Glacier Bay and out by Cross Sound. So we see animals from the western stock coming into our area regularly. And so it's important to note that those endangered western stock sea lions are in our area. And so we want to always assume that we might be seeing an endangered animal that needs extra special care to protect and reduce disturbance. So at South Marble Island, which is the main stellar sea lion haulout in Glacier Bay. How can we help to enjoy and protect this important habitat where stellar sea lions are known to congregate and haul out? Well, it used to be that stellar sea lions only really hauled out on the north side of the island, but as you can see here in the areas outlined in yellow, stellar sea lions haul out in all of these areas now. In recent years, more and more animals have been hauling out on the southern end of the island. So they're hauling out really on almost any accessible rock now on the island. There is a regulation, like I said, to stay at least 100 yards away from any hauled out stellar sea lion anywhere in the park. Now, there is also a regulation that says on the southern end of South Marble Island, um, vessels are allowed to approach closer than 100 yards to the island. They are allowed to approach up to 50 yards from the island to view nesting seabirds. However, if stellar sea lions are present and hauled out, you must maintain the 100 yards. So if they are not hauled out, as in green here, if the stellar sea lions are not hauled out, then you can approach within 50 yards to watch birds. But these days it's unusual not to see stellar sea lions hauled out in most areas. And so 100 yards is always a safe bet. But if you happen to be there and there's an area with some nesting seabirds that you'd like to take a closer look at, and there's no stellar sea lions hauled out nearby, then you may approach the southern end of South Marble Island up, as close as 50 yards. It's clear from AIS position data that tour and charter vessels in 2019 and recent years, a similar pattern. Many show that many vessels are getting closer than 100 yards to South Marble Island in areas that are very commonly densely populated with hauled out stellar sea lions. So we're seeing lots of times when vessels are getting a bit too close here. We'd like to remind everyone to stay 100 yards away from any hauled out stellar sea lion to prevent those animals from being disturbed. If it helps, we do have waypoints available to help vessels abide by the 100-yard rule, and you can get those from Glacier Bay Commercial Services and use those as a guide to stay at least 100 yards away. Finally, I'd like to just mention that there is a hydrophone anchored outside of Bartlett Cove at the mouth of Bartlett Cove. It's been collecting underwater sound data for many, many years and helped us to understand the underwater sound environment of Glacier Bay. The location of the hydrophone is shown on this map with a green circle and star. And then the location of the cable that runs about 5 miles from that hydrophone all the way back into the office of Chris Gabriel at park headquarters, that's shown in the red line. Now this hydrophone cable is a hardwired cable. It's very difficult to troubleshoot when it breaks. And one of the most common reasons it breaks is because vessels inadvertently anchor on or near it and drag anchor or just directly anchor on it. If you happen to snag the cable by mistake, please, please, please report that to the Viz as soon as possible, because and get an exact location of where that interaction occurred, because that can really save us a lot of time in troubleshooting when the hydrophone isn't working, what part of the cable might have been broken, and then we can go and repair that exact specific area without having to search all 5 miles of cable to see where the break occurred. Thank you for your help with this. That's all I have today about marine mammals and Glacier Bay. And if you have any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I've put my contact information on the slide. I hope everyone has a great season. Please, again, contact us if you have any questions. Say hello if you see us on the dock, and let's keep in touch.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Lewis, the terrestrial wildlife biologist for Glacier Bay National Park. And I'm sorry that we can't be together to talk about terrestrial wildlife in Glacier Bay, but I hope you enjoy this slideshow. And on this slide is my contact information, my email, and my phone number. And I will show it again at the end of the slideshow. So please do not hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or concerns at any time this summer. I'm going to talk about, terrestrial wildlife as well as wilderness research. Give you a couple updates and then talk about some main points in terms of minimizing disturbance to wildlife as well as maintaining wilderness experience for all of our visitors, which we all hope to achieve in Glacier Bay. Some of the things that I work on include wolf diet and distribution. And I will tell you a little bit about what we've learned so far about wolves in Glacier Bay. Human bear management, so that includes any kind of conflicts between people and bears across the entire park. I do nesting seabird monitoring, which informs the closures that we have to human use on some of the seabird islands, as well as a Tlingit gull egg harvest. One of the studies we finished up a couple years ago was looking at the effects of tourism on wildlife, and I will talk about that as well. And then, as you might know, the park has been working on a backcountry wilderness management plan, and part of that entails wilderness character monitoring. So, talk to you a little bit about that too. A few other things that I have done research on in the past many years that I'm not going to be talking about include mountain goats, glacier bears, soundscape, and post-glacial mammal succession, meaning how animals have recolonized the shoreline of Glacier Bay since the retreat of the ice. If you want to know more about those topics, you can see my website. The address is at the bottom. I think if you Google Tanya Lewis, Glacier Bay, NPS, something like that, you'll probably find it if you don't want to write that down. But I do have quite a few links to papers and project overviews. So feel free to dive into that and let me know if you have questions. Okay, I'm going to start by talking about wolves. And as some of you might remember, last year we kicked off a sort of more intensive look at wolf diet across the shoreline of Glacier Bay, as well as outside. I got some samples from Dry Bay, the mouth of the Elsek. We would hope to get, the whole park, but our focus is Glacier Bay. And this picture here is pretty interesting. I don't have a picture of a wolf eating a sea otter, but this is actually a coyote eating a sea otter. And I believe that wolves killed the sea otter or found it and scavenged it, and that our presence scared off the wolves, and the coyote, who was a little more tolerant of us, was able to jump in there, and what the coyote's doing is gnawing off a foot of the sea otter carcass, and then ran away into the woods and then came back for more. So anyway, the bottom line is that wolves and coyotes are eating quite a bit of sea otter. This graph here shows species consumed by numbers of scats, and we so far have analyzed 77 scats. We have more to analyze, but 33 of those contain sea otter. So the next step is to look at this across geographic areas in the park and different packs and different pack ranges, and see if there's variety, that some wolves are eating more sea otters than others. Moose was 27. That was the second highest diet item. And a lot of those were from the upper west arm. It seems like that's where wolves are getting the most moose. But again, we'll look at that geographically once we get all the results. Next, small rodent, songbird, and then oceanic fish. A lot of these are small intertidal fish, blennies or gunnels they're called, that live under the rocks, and wolves are targeting them. And then just not very many salmon. Last year was an even year, which means there's low pink salmon returns. So I would expect this year to have more salmon in the diet. But we are going to continue this study for the next few years and get more samples. And wolves eating sea otters is a relatively new phenomena that researchers are finding from basically from Pleasant Island, Gustavus, all the way up to Katmai. And it's really interesting. So we're in collaboration with state and other federal biologists looking at this across a wide range and comparing it to ultimately to sea otter densities across these different areas. So one of the other things we're doing in our research is using direct observations and remote cameras to determine the pack distribution and home ranges, and then sizes as well. So we were able to find 3 different packs last summer, and then that's in addition to the pack that uses Gustavus and Bartlett Cove area in the lower bay as well. And when we did find wolf activity, we would put up these cameras, and once in a while we lucked out. I want to show you this video of it's real common to see a wolf or two come by these cameras, but in this case, we were actually able to see some pups and get probably a pretty good pup count. Um, there's 4, and wait for it. There's number 5. So that was really cool. Another pack we were able to watch them for a while and see 2 pups. And then a third pack, we actually saw a couple pups from the boat. So just kind of getting a handle on where the packs are in the summer and their pack size, and then we can go in and look for their scat and see what they're eating. So very cool study. There's more on the website if you want to learn more. All right, on to bears. We've done a lot of bear research in the park so far, and again, look at the website and you will find it, or our overall Glacier Bay Bears website. In terms of human bear conflicts, which we are very much trying to minimize, we ask that people stay 100 yards from bears on the beach from the vessel. And that's just a real general distance. If you see bears are changing their behavior because of your boat, or your presence, please do back off. These obviously, some of these bears, these shoreline bears, get a lot of boats and people looking at them, and the goal is to just allow them to continue their natural behavior without displacing them, and that's a win-win for the bears and for the people watching the bears. So if your captains can just be really attuned to the bear behavior, if they start looking at the boat repeatedly, that means they're tuning into you, and they probably are going to move off real soon. So the goal is to stay far enough away where they're not changing their behavior at all. Again, we have a lot of good information about bear-human conflicts on the website. Food and gear, controlling your food and gear are the #1 most important parts of minimizing human-bear conflicts. So for the most part, I don't think you guys are mostly eating on shore, but if you are, you need to be with your food and very close, not leaving anything unattended. And one thing I have seen is people leaving a pile of float coats on the shore and then taking a hike, which is fine, but just be aware that if a bear comes along, they're very curious. They like to explore things with their teeth and their claws. And playing with people's gear can be a bit of a reward for them that might encourage them to do it again. So try not to leave gear if you can. So salmon streams, we ask that tour vessels do not take people onto salmon streams when the salmon are actively spawning above the high tide line. So below high tide is an excellent place for people to watch salmon in the rivers, but please don't take large groups up above that. And the exception, of course, is the Bartlett River, where large groups are very welcome. Okay, I'm going to switch gears to nesting seabirds. And this is a map of our closures. The red are sort of long-term closures, year-round, closed in the Code of Federal Regulations. And then the yellow triangles are temporary closures that we've closed pretty much every year for the last 5 or 10 years, and will probably be closed again next year. I do monitor all these sites, and some of the permanent closures do no longer have nesting seabirds, and we're working on updating those closures, but they are still closed in the Code of Federal Regulations. So there are nesting seabirds in other places as well, though. So we ask that if you do see a colony of nesting seabirds, glaucous winged gulls, mew gulls, which are now called actually short-billed gulls, or Arctic terns, that you stay 100 yards from these colonies, and they'll usually let you know they're there by dive bombing you. So if you're getting dive bombed, please walk the other way. And then there are solitary nesting seabirds like black oyster catchers, and we ask that you stay 50 yards from those nests just to give them space to reproduce and continue to have baby birds that will repopulate these areas, hopefully forever. All right, I'm going to switch gears again to a wildlife disturbance study that we did from 2017 and 18. And some of you may remember, if you look at this map, we had a schedule where we moved the tour vessel heavy use locations between different sites as kind of a treatment of, high numbers of people versus low numbers of people, to look at how this affected wildlife activity. And there's a paper that was published last year, and there's a link on my website if you want to dive deep into that. And this graphic comes from the paper, and it's a little bit complex, but basically what we found, and if you look at the 4 species we looked at, brown bears, black bears, moose, and wolves, brown bears, there was basically no real difference in time or space in terms of high numbers of people on the beach versus low for brown bears. For black bears, there was some sort of mixed results where black bears were found more at sites that were heavily used, but they used the areas less. So overall, a little bit less activity with increased human activity. Moose were found to actually have more activity when people are around, and one of the possible reasons for that is sort of the human shield hypothesis, meaning that prey species might tend to hang out in areas of people because the predators are going to be less likely to hang out there. So that's interesting and possibility. And then wolves were not found at all in heavy use sites like Bartlett Cove, but had some mixed results as well. If you go down below the graphic, and some interesting overall patterns we saw is that wildlife detections of all 4 species did not exceed 5 per week unless there were absolutely no people. And wildlife detections dropped to 0 at all the backcountry sites as human activity approached 30 camera minutes, which equated to about 40 people using a beach in a given week. All detections of those 4 species dropped to 0. So from this, we have learned that there is a threshold of human use that does cause displacement of animals, not permanent displacement, but displacement for a given time period when people are using the beach. We know it is 40 is the high. We don't exactly know how many people you can have on a given beach and still allow for animal activity. But basically, the take-home message on this study is that we want to concentrate high numbers of visitors at specific shoreline locations where the habitat quality is lower. And these areas tend to be around the glaciers, because around the glaciers is basically a lot of rock and ice. And so these are where we focus our tour vessel heavy use locations. And that is where we want people to go for off-vessel shoreline experience. And you may see animals in these areas, like Reed Inlet, for example, but they're passing through. There's just not a lot of good food on the beach in those locations. So it's a great place to take a lot of people. And it also goes with our park's founding legislation, the purpose which being to provide access to tidewater glaciers and allow visitors to experience glaciers close up. So we also want to disperse low numbers of visitors in the high quality habitat areas. And some of the areas that we're a bit concerned about use levels are Sandy Spokane Coves area, Gloomy Knob, and places like Fern Harbor. Basically, habitat quality for most species increases with the number of years since deglaciation, meaning the forested areas of the lower bay. And of course, Fern Harbor is surrounded by old growth areas. Gloomy Knob is kind of a unique area where there's mountain goats and bears, salmon stream, all that stuff going on. So we ask you to keep this in mind that when you have a lot of people that you want to take to the beach, that you move your areas around, either go to the heavy use areas, the glacier locations, or you move people around enough where there's not going to be, you know, 30, 40, 50, 100 people on the very same beach in a week. We want to keep those numbers low and dispersed in those high quality habitat areas. And then another thing is that water-based wildlife viewing is excellent in Glacier Bay. And the cool thing is that when people are on the vessel, a lot of times the animals are not as wary and they don't get displaced as easily. And so, to the extent that you can provide that for your visitors, water-based wildlife viewing, and again, watching the animals' behavior, making sure that you're not too close to change that behavior, it really is a win-win for everyone. So again, if you have any questions on this, please reach out. I'm happy to talk more. As part of our wilderness character management plan, we have been tracking wilderness use in the Bay for the past 5 to 10 years. And wilderness use includes tour off-vessel activities that occur on the ground. Wilderness starts generally above high tide, right? So that would be your hiking trips and charter off-vessel activities, again, on the ground above high tide. Another use that I don't have in this graph is our campers. And so that there's basically 3 main user groups of the wilderness. And campers, they can be commercial or private. Usually they're kayaking, but sometimes there's hikers. So keep in mind that your use is accumulative with all the other use, all the other tour vessels, all the other charter vessels, and the campers. So these are use levels for tour vessels on the top, charters on the bottom. Charters, we only have a couple years so far. Tour, we have since 2016, of course, minus 2020 when there were no tour vessels. And this gives us a use or an idea of use patterns across a year, and can kind of help us. We can add up all these numbers of people at given locations across years and look for where we may have, basically too many people to support the wildlife activity as well as our wilderness experience for all visitors. Our tour vessel heavy use locations this year are the same. Of course, Bartlett Cove, and then Reed, the west side of Reed, and Lamplugh. These seem to be working out really well. If anyone has comments on that, please let commercial services know. But these are areas, as I mentioned, that can handle heavier use, and places where we like to see people go. The data that I showed previously is based off our off-vessel activity reports. We really, really like this data. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. I know you also have to do your full trip reports and then the detailed off-vessel activity reports. But they are really valuable data to the park, and I really appreciate. If you have any questions about how to fill this out, we've tried to standardize things with these drop-down menus so that the data is easy to enter and easy to analyze. So again, thank you for filling these out for each trip. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great summer. Again, I wish we were in person, but there's my contact information and my website. Don't hesitate to reach out. And if you see me around the beach, please introduce yourself. I really appreciate you guys being excellent hosts to our visitors in Glacier Bay, and hope to meet you someday. Thank you.
And welcome. My name is Chad Soyseth. I'm a fisheries biologist at Glacier Bay National Park. My counterpart is Craig Murdoch. It's possible that if you try to contact myself or him, you'll get one or the other of us. Today I'm going to talk to you about guided charter fishing in Glacier Bay National Park. I'm going to talk about how fishing in the park is different relative to areas outside the park. I want to recognize the guide's role, your guys' role in influencing client expectation and experience. And then finally, I'm just going to go over some of the concessions contract requirements and the reasoning behind those. Fishing in the park is different for other reasons as well. Our enabling legislation, establishing the park came about because scientist, ecologist William S. Cooper, who was early in the park, looking at how vegetation communities changed over time and at distances from glaciers, gave a talk to the Ecological Society of America. And they had a discussion after he talked about the importance of Glacier Bay as an area to do science. And the ESA, along with other scientists, were key in petitioning President Coolidge for protection of Glacier Bay. And essentially, Glacier Bay was established for the study of glaciation, animal movement, and ecosystem succession, among other things. The National Park Service management policies, it's a 2006 document that kind of rolls up the Organic Act, the Enabling Proclamation, and other regulation and guidance, requires us to monitor harvest. There's supposed to be no unacceptable impact to park resources or natural processes, distributions, densities, or age class distributions, and no unacceptable impact to native species important to harvested species, or likewise native species using harvested species for any purpose. There's a long history of recreational fishing in Glacier Bay. These two middle panels I want to draw your eye to just represent some of the earliest documentation of recreational fishing in Southeast Alaska. There's a variety of clients aboard the steamship Spokane that if you look closely you can see that they've been hand lining halibut. There's a variety of halibut on the deck. So the Spokane came to Glacier Bay periodically in the early 1900s and visited Muir Glacier. Construction began on Glacier Bay Lodge in 1965. When it was completed shortly thereafter, Frank Kearns was the first concessions manager there. Here's Frank with a relatively large salmon. And this last panel on the right here, last image on the right, is an image that illustrates much the same activity as we see today in respective areas adjacent to the park. In terms of Glacier Bay halibut harvest, I just wanted to draw your eye to this graph. You can see that commercial harvest historically accounted for the lion's share of harvest. However, this has declined quite a bit, especially over the last decade. And one of the most important things that I wanted to emphasize is just that recreational and commercial harvest levels have been pretty comparable since 2011, and that's likely to continue on into the future. Collectively, we all need to collaborate to become better resource stewards. How can we work together to best ensure that the halibut resource and the industry continues on into the future? As guides, you guys have lots of power and authority. There was a study by Jason Gasper and others associated with the University of Washington, I think back in 2004, where they surveyed a variety of Gustavus clients and guides and questioned them in particular about fishing technique and guidance relating to large halibut release and the rationale behind that release. 140 clients and 13 guides participated in the survey, and 70% of the clients said that the guides encouraged them to release fish, and 90% of them cited a biological rationale. Larger females produce greater numbers of eggs, so you should release those fish. And half of clients actually releasing large fish said that one of the reasons they released those fish was because they were encouraged by the guide. The client openness to the guide messaging really influenced their willingness to release large fish. So just in looking at clients and guides, clients expect accurate and honest information from guides, especially in regard to regulations. Their personal beliefs and expertise will affect their receptivity to the guide influence, and ultimately they can influence guide behavior through tipping. Guides, in turn, provide and control the information they disseminate to clients. They really have an opportunity to educate clients. First and foremost, they construct and manage client expectation and experience. And whether they realize it or not, they consider the client's openness to their messaging when providing conservation perspective. Fishing under your contract. I want to hit just a few details of the requirements under your contract. There's no guided freshwater fishing authorized under your contract, with the exception of a couple of historical operators on the Dundas and Seclusion River. Why is this? Well, historically, guided fishing here in the park and in this area was marine-based. There was very limited freshwater demand, and freshwater fishing, guided fishing, would occur in designated wilderness, and there are requirements under the Wilderness Act and NEPA that would require us to first determine whether it's a necessary and appropriate activity, especially in relation to things like unguided fishing, and then how much level of use is realistic. We also have a few conservation concerns despite relatively conservative fish and game bag limits for these species of steelhead and cutthroat trout, whose populations can number from 50 to the low hundreds, particularly in small systems and newly emerged glacially influenced systems. We have a monthly sport fishing report requirement. Why is that? Because management policy requires us to conduct harvest monitoring, and even though you guys are required to report in charter logbooks, there's some issue with how well some of that information and the statewide harvest survey information agrees with the park information. So we're still kind of testing that. It works really well in Glacier Bay proper and Outer Coast, but not so well in Cross Sound, Icy Strait area. So I just want to focus on the survey reports. They're due the 5th of each month for the previous month. They're vessel trip and location based. Use one or more lines per each location that you stopped and fished at. Record the boat effort, not the individual angler effort, but the boat effort for all of the anglers at each fishing location by either salmon or bottom fish. And then report the species kept and released at each location. And most importantly, or equally as importantly, I should say, report fishing effort even if there were no fish caught. Sharks exhibit relatively low reproductive capability with only up to maybe half a dozen pups per year. And one added benefit of not harvesting rockfish is that they tend to bioaccumulate relatively high mercury loads. We have an in-water halibut release requirement for those fish that you're planning to release. We urge you to follow best management practices for all intentional releases of all species. Why? Because it reduces unnecessary stress and mortality. There is an NPS regulation that requires careful and immediate release. Ultimately, a successful release and survival of that fish allows another angler the potential opportunity to catch that fish. Well, there's quite a bit of best management practices guidance online. Basically, they all boil down to the type of gear you use. There are certain gear types that are better than others. Hooking location, where the fish is hooked, determines its survival capability, as well as playing time and release methods. There's a couple of NPS links that you can look at here. There's other information online. Ultimately, if it just takes too long to release that fish, one of the best things you can do is just cut the line above the hook. Eventually that hook will work its way out. There's a fish consumption advisory, and we would really appreciate if you would create client awareness for this. This is something that was produced by the State of Alaska Department of Public Health, and it's a guideline available online for Alaska women and children, and it relates to eating fish safely. Mercury harms developing nervous systems in unborn babies and in young children. This particular approach is a bioaccumulation-based point system. Eating fish is good, but not particularly old, long-lived fish, because they tend to really load up on that mercury. So we ask you to post this on board your vessel. Awareness enables individual action, and here's a link where you can download that. Finally, there's a couple of other non-contract items that I just want to touch on briefly. Firearms, firearm discharge, and use of other explosives like seal bombs and fireworks, as well as like bang sticks, are prohibited. Guides and visitors are prohibited from using firearms, bang sticks, or explosives for dispatching harvested fish, and hazing or killing wildlife. Why? Because hunting is not allowed in Glacier Bay National Park. National Park Service nationwide regulations prohibit discharge of firearms or other explosives. There are safety concerns with using these things. There are safety concerns with using these devices, and there can be an impact on sound quality, especially in regard to underwater sound. The Marine Mammal Protection Act prohibits marine mammal take. Use of seal bombs may be considered a take. Finally, guided anglerfish. There's a use restriction in terms of guided anglerfish. There's no guided anglerfish use in Glacier Bay proper. Why is this? Because we have a lifetime access permit fishery, commercial fishery there that authorizes only qualifying fishers to continue fishing there for halibut for the remainder of their life. And non-LAP guided anglerfish use in Glacier Bay is contrary to the regulatory intent. So even though GAF is not authorized in Glacier Bay, it is authorized for outer waters. Lastly, have a great summer, you guys. Fishing is a great way for you and your clients to experience the park. Please abide by all rules and regulations. Consider the need to balance use and conservation. Be safe out there and have fun.